back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host, Manny, and today we've got a special episode. We have what we're calling Dub-Ois. How we doing?
Doing good,
What's
man.
Obviously, I am very aware, and these have been on the podcast before, but for new listeners and people have just started following on, if you introduce yourself, let us know who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are. Have you ever wondered how I'm able to run my business, my podcast, and still be able to coach? Well, I use Team Builder. Team Builder is an all-in-one coaching software that reduces the amount of time that we spend on the back end of programming, on our Google Sheets, on our Excels, and allows me more freedom to do testing. With this podcast and episodes, I'm actually able to run some programs that I learned through different coaches coming on. To find out how you can use Team Builder and how it can apply to your own program, visit the link in the description and catch yourself a 30-day free trial. Just simply use code PACHOCUP, that's PACHALQUP, and start the next stage of your coaching career.
You can go
Nate, you
first.
want to go first? Oh,
After
great.
you. Yeah.
Rock, paper, scissors.
way to make it so awkward to start. Okay, whatever. My name's
Hold on, real quick. Manny said he would introduce you first.
okay. Fine. Fair. All right. So my name's Brandon. I know Manny from interning with him at University of Washington with the football team. We were part of their strength staff in what season was that? 2022. After that, bounced around to a couple other internships in strength and conditioning before moving to New York, and been based out of New York as a personal trainer since then. So I've been a personal trainer now for almost coming up on 2 years, and then also coaching as a strength coach for a rugby team, a local club rugby team here now. Short little synopsis on me. Go ahead, Nate.
Awesome. Yeah, so as Chu mentioned, we all know each other through strength and conditioning at the University of Washington during 2022. So I got to meet these fine gentlemen, and ever since then, we've been picking each other's brains and working together far away. If Manny's in Scotland, Chu's in New York, I'm in Seattle, Washington. But a little, as Chu said, synopsis on myself would be that going into strength and conditioning, prior to that, I was more in the therapeutical and rehabilitation side of things for kinesiology, exercise scientists. And then that transferred over to strength conditioning later on as well. So a lot of my biases came from that background. I like to root myself in a lot of anatomy and physiology. And going forward, I'm current strength and conditioning coach at Maximum Sports Conditioning, located in Bellevue, Washington. I've been there for 3 years now, almost going on 4. So there's some overlap with that in University of Washington. And ever since then, we've been trying to create better athletes, trying to change lives, and just picking everyone's brains and trying to learn more throughout the years that we're here. So, yeah.
We ain't got many years left, man. At this rate that we're working, we ain't got many years left.
This is what annoys me, is like these are still little puppies, and I'm like fucking knocking on 30's doors.
How old are you, Manny?
Turning 30 next year.
Actually, fuck.
Why would you have that reaction, Chu? That's
I
made him feel so much better.
No, do you know that Kevin Hart meme where he's like, damn?
Oh man, no, 30 is a great year. A lot of my class are 30, and they're
my friends.
No, but they're awesome. They tell me about how nice being in your 30s is. Like, you're a lot
shut the
more
fuck up.
Yeah. Hey man,
you're not
I thought you were younger. That should be a compliment.
Right? To be fair, I was saying to Nate this. I still feel like I'm 18. Like, I still do the same dumb shit that I did at 18.
Yeah, that's what matters. I mean, it's how old you think versus.
We were also talking about plyomat, and I kind of want to get onto it because I love talking about our RSI and jump ability. We do have a very springy member amongst us. Nate is fucking eats springs for breakfast, I think. How do you use plyomat, or how have you seen it getting used?
Yeah. So that's a good question too. I would say since the last time I got to talk to you, there's many things I still utilize, obviously, right? Those are kind of my pillars and foundations. And then I know on the episode and even behind the scenes as well, we got to kind of get talking about, what's kind of in the gist, what we're working with, just trying to experiment behind the scenes, right? So one of those things during this past year that I kind of got to, you know, cycle within not just my own training, but the training that I have for my athletes and programming, right, is the plyomet. So number one thing I do with it is jumping, right? So whether if it's depth jumps, pogo hops, some days we're tracking RSI. We haven't been really doing it recently. And I think we talked about it as a logistical thing as well. So we don't need to go too deep into that. But yeah, so I mean, we'll jump with it. We'll do spring ankle series on it. So we'll do like a high prisoner jump, hands on hips, low prisoner jump, counter movement jump, pause jumps. We'll vary the height time to time for their depth jumps. So 10, 12, really nowhere further than that too. Just because I know there's multiple settings on the plyomet as well that says like, oh, we could see their contact time while they jump. I forget the specific setting. And obviously their RSI as well. But from a coaching eye as well, we're trying to, and I like to think about the KISS principle: keep it stupid simple, right? So have my job be, thinking the intricacies of everything and then the little nuances, while the athletes kind of just, give it their all, do what they got to do and try their best, right? So while I'm kind of looking at, okay, they may have gotten like a 28 on this vertical jump, but I see their contact time is nearly 500 milliseconds after a depth jump. I'm like, okay, like I'm glad you got the 28. That's awesome. And they're like, oh yeah, let's try to get a 30. I'm like, wait, hold on one second. Let's try to. This is what I want you to focus on this next one, right? So that's been kind of a huge thing for me this past year. I know we talked about time to peak velocity last time, so pretty much that goes back to how relative something is down to ground contact time, right? So if I'm trying to work with a sprinter and they're kind of trying to work on their blocks or whatever that sort, I might not want them on the ground for 500 milliseconds off a depth jump, right? They might be able to jump 30 off of a 24-inch depth jump, right? But how relative is that, right? I know that's probably something I would do with them during a GP period for the most part, but it's going to be a pretty far gap between that in itself and the actual event that they run, right? Because they're on the ground for about 70 to 80 milliseconds at top velocity, right? Or max velocity, I should say. So that's kind of been something that I've been keeping an eye out on for the plyomet. I know you talked about how you could, string multiple of them
Mm.
with each other as well. That's something I really want to do. I only have one plyomet. And, sometimes there's a lot of athletes that I work with. So we got to take in consideration what drills are going on, like where are we sprinting, where are we doing change of direction drills, right? So I might not be able, as much as I want to, like string up 10 of them and not be able to be doing pogo jumps, right? But that's kind of just what I've ran into this past year. So it's a great tool, and
Yeah.
I'd love to utilize it a little bit more often.
The thing I like as well is like you can make your own tests. And I don't know if that's something that you're using. Um, the one thing is because it is a new software, it's not fully developed yet, and some of the metrics don't quite match up. So you have to fill in all the fields, and sometimes it doesn't need it. But like I've used them a lot, especially with my athletics group. It's sick. You can like I use it for just figuring out where they are, their readiness. Like I like it.
Yeah. Do you usually, if you're tracking readiness, what test do you use?
Just CMG.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Just again kiss. Like
Mhm.
I just keep it simple because like if I've got a couple of them, I don't want to spend too much time fully testing their RSI before each. Like I'll do if it's a couple of them, but if it's like 10 or 12, I'm just like we'll just do a quick jump, see where you're at, and then move on.
Yeah, especially working with groups too. Like if it's different team sport athletes, right? Sometimes if you take in something rudimentary like a pogo jump or track RSI, right? There's a skill component as well, right? So if I throw a hockey player in there at the same time as like a track athlete, there's going to be
Mm.
little skill nuances and skill diversities that might bias one group over the other. So yeah, I think that's pretty great.
What's your what is the system like at Matt SC for you, Nathan?
Oh, for me, so we do semi-private training, right? So let's say if there's some athletes that I want to work in, it's pretty much like time slots, right? So I'm always there, you won't miss me, right? So we'll have athletes of different age groups, skill levels, come in at these time slots, and then we have workout programs for them, and then everyone's kind of doing their own thing in terms of like different programming. I know for we a lot of my population is honestly like youth to high school athletes as well. Especially as we know too, we work in the college sector, right? Once the season is going, they're there, right? So it's not like, oh, I get all the college athletes in the world, right? That's not the case, right? So with that as well, like a lot of broad emphasis of my athletes and population is taking in consideration the long term athletic development model, right? So having the weight room as the means, not so much the end, right? Because I think I've been kind of noticing this on social media too, and we were just talking about it in the lobby before this pod going live, right? Is that social media is a great tool, and I don't really utilize it for strength condition as much as I would like to, or I'm just not that in tune with social media. Besides the collages, as you guys would say. um, but yeah, and I think nowadays too, there's a lot of strength conditioning coaches that kind of make the weight room, everything. That is now the athlete sport. At the end of the day, right? I do understand it to a certain perspective, right? If you get their squat number up and it's part of keeping your job, everyone's got to make their money at the end of the day, right? But it does kind of skew some biases, and are we really helping ourselves? Are we helping the athletes? And that's pretty tough. Luckily, that's in a position that I'm in. I work with this great company and organization as well, so luckily I have a lot of communication that I'm able to talk to with the athletes, with parents, if it's someone that's obviously in high school or still going through those stages. And it's a pretty great opportunity, and I can't really trade much more for it.
That's something that we've been kind of speaking about on this podcast a lot. Is at what point is it like, are we using athletes to boost our income essentially, and like what does that actually like do for us? I think, I don't know to the full extent of the US, but in Europe, coaches will sort of speak in a way that they're the only one that hold this magical key that unlocks this amounts of performance. It's kind of like, do you, like, you're
Yeah,
just speaking fancy?
yeah, and I think it goes back to, if you're thinking about things from a human economical and ecological level. If you're talking about a little bit of like psychology, right? People like are in love with things emotionally, or they're in love with things logically, right? So some people are bought through emotion, some people are bought through logic, right? And this is a simple tactic in sales as well, right? Luckily, we all don't work in the business world like that, right? So we talk about muscles, the meathead stuff, right? So that's awesome for us. That's what we love to do, right? But I think even in our industry, we could find people that are emotionally bought in with certain, exercises or philosophies. And with an emotional bias like that, it could be quite, I'm not gonna say dangerous, but it could cause negative side effects for not just people that you work with directly, but with social media now. You could reach people across the world, right? So now if I'm, spreading, information, I'm not gonna say that's false, but that might be hyperbolic in nature at times. That could be an effect that not is not just local at this point; it's global. So I think um, a good role to be aware of is just, if you're working with a strength coach that might be bought into something emotionally, and it's just like, all my meat and potatoes is in the bicep curl and only the bicep curl or something of that sort. It's just something to stay wary of.
True.
Nate, so what? I was going
No,
to ask Nate
go
a
ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
What do you think is like the biggest thing that is, or what do you see, since you're working with a lot of youth athletes and high school athletes? What are some of the big rocks
Mm-hmm.
that are getting in their own way of their development, or what
Mm-hmm.
are the big roadblocks that you see are stopping kids from getting to the next level?
Yeah. So you're pretty familiar with the area that I'm into, so I think it's going to be easy to translate over as well. And then I think Manny, you being over here for a couple months and working with us too, I think you'll kind of pick up on the little nuances as well. But as we were in the same environment, we worked with collegiate athletes, so it's a little different, right? So I think some of the biggest roadblocks that you know, and I don't know if it's per se like an area or thing or something. It could always be scheduling, right? So growing up for me, I mean, I'm Washington State born and raised, right? And then there would be standardized tests that would be taken throughout the years that you're in school from K through 12, right? So I wasn't always the smartest one growing up because I didn't pick up on things pretty well. Luckily, I found my passion in strength conditioning later in life. And, I finally found something I actually thoroughly enjoy. I love doing the research. But man, I did not love geometry. I did not love like these little English tests and all that sort. But at the standardized test, the schools or the test scores that I would get, you got the average here. I was kind of down here a little bit. That was kind of my my
Hey
intellectual.
man, that's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay
yeah.
to be the special class.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Wow, you're laughing pretty hard.
Mate, I was in the special classes too.
I didn't
Hey
say
man,
that. I didn't.
we all been there. We all been there. They thought I couldn't speak English. God
Yeah.
damn.
So,
Same.
I was a shy.
I'm talking about district wide, okay? So let's take that into consideration. So but the area that and the kids I work with, they're very intellectual, they're very smart, and it could be a time thing as well. You got social media, you got technology, you even got AI, right? Even AI in our industry. So there's so much more access to what kids have nowadays compared to maybe even like as much as 10 years ago, right? It's almost like a decade thing or generational thing. So I think what the biggest thing is scheduling and stress. So stress to me back then was like, oh, whatever. Academics wasn't my pain point for stress. And I would say that was similar to maybe the population or peers that I was around at the time or everything of that sort. But here it's or a lot of the kids that I work with, it's a high academic area, right? So their stress is if they don't get like a 1450 or perfect score on the SAT, right? Or why they don't have a 4.0 in class, right? So that's kind of their stress. Like their 10 out of 10 for stress for that would be my 10 out of 10 for stress for like what let's say I'm doing. So you can't take into account that because my lifestyle is different and their lifestyle is different, we are experiencing different stress levels because of that. No, like you're physiologically, your body is doing the same things on the microscopic level as it would be during any other stressful situations. Luckily nowadays too, and I don't know if it's just because we've developed from cavemen and all that sort. We don't have to really stress about running away from leopards as much as we have to, right? But our development as like humans, we've taken up so much time to the point that like nowadays me running late for work might be the almost same equivalency like 5-10,000 years ago of me not finding dinner in time, right? So physiologically, I think scheduling and stress levels of the athletes that I work with has kind of been the biggest thing, right? So I would love to have athletes come in, like 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week, right? We had that luxury at UW, right? The student athletes flow in, flow out every day and day out. But I don't have that luxury as much. So now I got to take in consideration not just how much volume they're taking through their sports practices, because with high school athletes too, it's not just their high school season and they're done, right? You got their club seasons, you got multiple sports that they're playing, and I said high academic area, so you got constant emotional stressors and physiological stressors, and emotional and physiology go tied and tied. So I think that's a big obstacle that I had to face, but and as well as another roadblock too. I think with the rise of social media too, and then there are certain exercises out there or certain people or certain idols where they're just like, oh, this person said this and this person said that, so I need to do sport specific training in the weight room. And now that's where I had to kind of take a conversation and sit down and kind of have people understand, okay, I'm like, and then the athletes that I work with know that I my best intentions are for them. I'm not trying to skew them the wrong way or anything of that sort as well, right? But as I just mentioned too, the weight room is the means, so it's a tool. It's not the end, right? So if we're beating up a firing pattern, let's say, especially for rotational athletes, say for baseball, we're going for like hundreds of hits every week, right? Should I be doing anything similar in the weight room, not knowing how much load and tolerance that they're going through, not knowing what they're going through in life as well? So should I be training that in the weight room as well? Probably not. No, they need a base level of strength, right? In order to sustain those forces and velocities that's happening in their body. And I'm just using baseball as an example too, because it's very common that just because they're always rotating through one side, right, they'll really have some rotational problems in their back. So whether they're rotating through the lumbar, have pars fractures, anything of that sort, that's some things that I've seen as well. So I would say kind of the misuse of social media and the information and education that's been kind of spread through that, and as well as kind of like scheduling and stress that has been a huge roadblock for at least the long term athletes that I've been working with as well. So from like middle school, high school, and kind of forth.
True. How is it managing the stress in a higher paced city? With
Managing
like,
stress in a higher paced city.
yeah, with like, you've obviously got the PT side, and obviously not everyone's going to be coming in as frequently as well. How is that managing everything that goes into living in New York, I suppose?
Well, I wanted to ask Nate if he's read why zebras don't get ulcers.
Dude, tell me about it.
I was just curious because a lot of the things that you were talking about, and this will kind of tie into answering what you're asking me, Manny. A lot of what you were talking about, the relative stress,
Yeah.
is was a big takeaway that I got from reading Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. But to answer your question, Manny, what's stress like living in a fast-paced city? I mean, everyone here in New York City is doped up on caffeine to the gills, and the workaholic culture within the city, especially, I work with general population, and most of my clients range from late 20s to all the way up to 70. And so it runs the full gamut. I don't work with a lot of. I've had a couple youth athletes in and out who come from affluent families and play sports, and their parents want them to do well, so they hire a private strength coach. But for the most part, I would say with working, because I work with general population, the it's like you were talking about earlier, Nate. It's the KISS principle. It's rather simple in that when I see my clients, for most clients I see them 2 times a week, maybe for some 3, sometimes more. But very few clients am I seeing that regularly, and sometimes travel will get in the way. Kids are sick, kids are out of school, things will come up, cancellations, things like that, and there's always ebbs and flows, and things will always change. And so, in terms of managing workload, managing volumes, and stuff like that, I just come with the approach that when you see me, you're probably getting the most intense thing that you're doing. I know you're not getting this from your other exercise classes that you go to. I know you're not doing any type of high intensity lifting, and high intensity to you is very different than what it means to me, in the sense of, we think of high intensity as percentage based, right? General population thinks of high intensity as, oh my God, like my arms are burning, my arms are going to fall off, I'm sweating like a pig, and my heart's about to beat out of my chest. So when I try to manage my athletes, my clients, I just come with the approach of, every time that you see me, we're just going to not. It's a lot easier. I don't have to think about. There's no real end besides the goals that they want, but like, it's easy to just kind of go off script, and when we come back, we just pick right back up where we left off. So I have programs for everyone that's written out. But say, oh, week comes up where I'm traveling this week, I'm away, and when whatever point at which we stop at the program, when they come back, we just pick right back up, because I know that's where we left off. Those are things that are familiar to them. So it's not like I'm throwing anything new. It's not like I don't do anything.
How are you setting
I
those
don't do
sessions up
anything
though?
very complicated. How am I setting the sessions up?
Yeah.
In what sense? In terms of the flow of the session?
Because like from some you'll see like twice a week. So are you doing like
Mhm.
whole body 2 times, or are you like how are you splitting from like a 2 day at 2 times a week to
Okay,
four?
gotcha. So how does that actually program?
Yeah.
I would say all my clients I train total body because for me, if it doesn't make sense if I only see you one time a week, um, or twice, 3 times a week for me to really break things up because I know that there are going to be times in which you might cancel. And then so, if we're only doing upper body today and you cancel the next day, well, we only would have worked out trained upper body today. Even though the next time I see you, we would have picked up lower body. So rather, I prefer to just keep everything total body to keep it simple. But again, this is case by case basis because I have a little bit more freedom in terms of individualizing for everyone. So some people that are more consistent, and I know I see on a like say I have like for example one guy that comes in, he travels a lot, but he will come in 3 to 4 times a week when he is in town. And so when I know I'll see him 3 to 4 times a week, then I'll start to split things up, and I riff on what I have programmed out or what we're working on during like whatever phase we're in. And then when he travels, uh, and we have a shorter week, then I might start putting things together in terms of like normally we have an upper body, lower body day, right? I might just put that together, make a total body day because I'm only seeing you once this week versus 3 or 4 times. So it depends, and I'll try to cater to what makes most sense for them. And then yeah, it honestly is not much different from the approach in which we take when we work with athletes and we program things out for athletes, and that things come up in the season.
Mm.
Um,
Some flexibility
you're
in there.
always going to have to adjust. Yeah, so long as you understand like what are your kind of big overarching KPIs, where you're trying to get to. From there, like we all know that there's a ton of ways you can get there. So it's then we can just work around the constraints of schedule, constraints of travel, constraints of you know my son got sick, and my nanny's out, so I gotta stay home and take care of him. So things like that.
How's it programming for your population, Nate?
Oh, it's great.
I know you
So
run I know
yeah.
you run a conjugate system across there. Has that sort of
Mhm.
changed a little bit with you programming for yours, or?
Yeah, and I think the thing with conjugate, right? So people are married to certain things within conjugate, like oh, if you're not doing bot squats, it's not conjugate, right? Or if you're not doing bands and chains, you're not doing conjugate, right? Conjugate is not about bands and chains, bot squats. It's not about back slaps, and if you want to add that in, go ahead, right? But it's about training a variety of speeds for a variety of needs throughout the year, right? So the reason why I don't personally do linear periodization is because you lose certain adaptations, right? Especially whether if you got a track athlete or a baseball athlete or football athlete, you got to be able to have a variety of adaptations at will, right? So if I'm in the middle of, let's say, if I got a powerlifting athlete and then someone says, "Oh, in 6 weeks, I challenge you to a push pull meet," right? Something of that sort. I know it's kind of being hyperbolic in a sense or being arbitrary in terms of situation, but let's say if that's the case, right? So if I have 6 weeks and I'm in my hypertrophy block or whatever, or my GP block, right? So how am I going to be able to peak within 6 weeks, right? So because I'm training a variety of speeds throughout the year, whether if it's speed strength, strength speed, whether if you're referencing off of Brian Mann or super training, whatever speed you may go with or whatever you do, you got to be able to kind of train within the 90 percentile. It's like, sprinting. You got to be able to sprint fast year long, right? So I still do conjugate, but within my conjugate or programming and logistics too. And I work with other coaches. It's not just like me doing all of the programming as well. So there's a lot of strength coaches that I work with that have developed this program with me, and it's not just me, right? But I would say a development over the past year, and if people want to talk about conjugate or hear about what prior programming looked like, they could also listen to our previous episode 8 in November 2023, right?
Seven.
Something.
Yeah.
Yeah, something of that sort. So I know that was like 3 hours long, so I don't want to go into that again in terms of talking about content here for 3 hours long. I know you and all of us are kind of on a time crunch today, so I'll talk about the new stuff with it. So within the past year and some change, I invested it into some VBT. So I invested in an eNode, so eNode Pro. I think it was previously named VMAX Pro. So the reason why I was influenced with that particular brand too is that I really wanted to measure time to peak velocity. So the reason why I say time to peak velocity is it's relative to most athletes' contraction rates for their sports and co-contraction rates. And I really was influenced by a couple people, right? So Rolf Foreman, Randy Huntington. I would say those are the two primary ones that really influenced me with my investment with velocity-based training, particularly with VMAX Pro and eNode Pro. I know those are two brand, or that is a brand that they kind of harped on about, which is really good, right? I know there's other VBT brands such as OVR right now. So that's something that I've used before too, and it's a really good brand. But I'd say for vast majority of the athletes that I've programmed for, eNode has been the primary usage for VBT. So I think we talked about in the previous pod, they would be pretty much hitting 90% or more. So they'd be going for a record, my athletes, every week. So different variations. So 4 week cycles, whether if it's straight bar, bot squat, safety bar, bot squat, straight bar would change, safety bar would change, whatever the stimulus may be, right? So they're always working within 90% of their 1RM. But what I got to experiment throughout the past year is working with this velocity-based training. I wanted to find a way and find the means of how I could train power, but not through force, but through velocity, right? Because if I'm able to progress velocity in the weight room, I'm going to be able to progress that through their practice or sports as well. And I think it's a little bit more towards or biased towards, let's say, sprinting, jumping, and everything of that sort, right? So if I'm doing a long jump, right? If I'm kind of stuck around like 9.3 meters per second during practice, right? And if I'm never able to practice that, and then the next thing that would take me a couple, meters more would be going to 9.4, 9.5 meters per second. I'm never going to be able to hit that if the forces are high, but the forces are always going to be high. But if the velocity is never progressed, right? And then your body could only take so many jumps, so many contacts throughout the week. So how do we kind of accommodate that? So that we're going to do that through the weight room. So what I did was I would still make people squat heavy. So they would squat for a 1RM or roughly around that area every 4 weeks. Every 4 weeks. Now within that, they would be having a working percentage, and I'd kind of go through like whether if it's 90% or of their 1RM, and I'd have them like work a double or something of that sort. And they would always be doing something on the opposite side of the force velocity spectrum. So something heavy, something fast, something heavy, something fast. So let's say all my athletes squat, so they'd be doing that. But what I also kind of used was using 1RMs of power. So it wouldn't be so much 1RMs of weight, but 1RMs of power. So I wasn't training power in itself, but I was training for power. So anytime I had to peak someone, then I would train within the realms of their peak power, right? And if I ever was measuring fatigue, by the way, I'd always measure it off of average power. I'd never do off of peak power. There's too many nuances, and it could be sporadic at times as well, depending on rest and recovery. So something that I was kind of bought into, and something that I really wanted to see if it worked without much change in terms of sprint tempo, or I shouldn't say sprint tempo, but sprint intensity, sprint volume, was the usage of TPV and drop squats as well. So that was something that I really did a lot of research into. So I used TPV on drop squats, and then I was able to see athletes produce 5,000 watts of force or 5,000 watts within about 200 milliseconds. So if we're thinking 5,000 watts in 200 milliseconds, that is considered a plyometric time if you're talking about ground contact time. So that was something that was utilized during my athletes that if they're working on their first day in. Another thing that I would do as well is I would do heavy step ups and light step ups. So I would do 12 inches, 8 inches, and 4 inches, right? So they'd be working through that throughout the week as well. If an athlete only came in with me once a week, I'd only stick with 12. If they came in multiple times a week, I try to progress and utilize all those bots heights as well. But yeah, we're looking at TPVs anywhere, and then this is from Ralph Oman as well. So I'm not making these numbers up or anything of that sort. It's from Ralph Oman, and then I was able to kind of utilize that too. So if we're thinking of power or strength, I should say strength at first, we're kind of in the realm of 270 milliseconds. So during those squats, during those drop squats, if I was more in a strength phase, right, because we kind of got to utilize strength first, that would be in the realm that I'm in. Now, if we're trying to peak or we're trying to go through velocity or speed, I'd drop down TPVs as low as 170 milliseconds for squats. Now, for step ups, we would see millisecond time as quick as about 90 milliseconds with about 100 kilos on their back. So if I'm moving 225 pounds on a 12-inch, 8-inch, or a 4-inch step up, and I'm able to not just move that within 80 milliseconds, but if I'm able to produce enough power, and I'm not going to say enough power because enough power is relative because it's kilograms per body weight or kilograms per watt, I should say. That is something that I look more importantly to, because now I'm also looking at their peak power during it and also the time that they're able to create that peak power. So time to peak velocity. So that was a big thing as well. I mean, accessories are accessories. So we do that. We still do reverse hyper year round long, single leg reverse hyper, double leg reverse hyper. But I would say that's kind of the big thing as well, using VBT in my programming.
What's some of the results that you've found using the 1RM for VBT instead of your traditional 1RMs?
Yeah. So for like the peak power, right? So
Yeah.
it takes a lot more time for me to analyze, right? Because I could tell like one of my athletes, like find a 1RM, right? Follow these percentages and you'll get your 1RM. And they'll grind out this weird looking squat, right? They kind of start shifting to the side. You got a vein popping out from the forehead, right? It's kind of what me and Chu used to look like working out at UW, right? So yeah, especially with those heavy
Bro,
RDLs and all
Chu,
that.
Chu was on
Yeah,
a heavy French contrast.
yeah, I know that.
Oh, I forgot about that.
That was
Yeah,
Yeah.
dope. I
yeah,
like I
I
learned
was. That was
French
fun.
contrast from you.
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah,
It,
I mean that's
it
the
wasn't. I don't think
contrast.
it was traditional, but sorry.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask. Wait, did you finish explaining your answer?
I was at the point when I was like, oh, some of my athletes would look at you while they do their 1RMs.
Oh,
Okay. But yeah. Well, but I'd in
Jesus
just
Christ.
I'd do I would look very carefully and look at the logistics and data and say this is your peak power, 1RM. So yeah.
So before you jump into, how easy is it to look at the results through eNode?
So if I am from the get go not a person that loves looking at a lot of numbers, but the fact that I'm looking at it to help performance out, I can kind of put that aside. Right? I'm like, okay, how do we get them to jump higher or sprint faster? Right. So it could be kind of, and I know you're a data sheet person as well. So you might be really into this as well. But anytime I would have an athlete hook up to the eNote, so they would be going through the eNote app in itself. After a workout or the workouts or exercises that I want them to be tracked, they would send me their data and then send it to me through to analyze, right? Or if I'm with them live or in person, right? Or if I'm not doing many other
Mm,
things as well, and I'm literally just babysitting them, I would be able to kind of just look at the data right there live. I'm like, okay, go up by 15 kilos, go up by however much weight, right? And then that peak power, I'd work that peak power on 90% or 110%. So going through the force side of things of that peak power or the velocity side of that peak power, right? So we're not training peak power in itself. We are training
other end.
yeah, exactly. So the 110%, 90% of it, right? And then obviously I'm pairing that with whether
Yeah.
drop squats, box jumps, stair jumps, broad jumps, explosive step ups, whatever it may be. So that's kind of the gist of that.
Yeah. Sorry, Chu.
So it was a handful at times, but I still love to do it, so it's not a problem to me.
I had a question about the when you're tracking the power and trying to determine what to put on the bar
Mm-hmm.
to achieve the right velocity zones. Are you doing that real time? When like are you looking at power real time, or is it something you like you printed out on their sheet and then that's what they have for the day?
So let's say week one, right? And I'm not doing this right now, but this is what I was doing when I was really trying to experiment and see if eNode was the right fit, and I love it. So in real time, so if I was like right next to them, working with the athlete too, and all that sort. And then not everyone was using velocity based training, by the way. Some people are just doing like general strength training, and VBT is still considered general strength training, right? But depends on training age. So when I was there, I was able to kind of see the numbers on like a tablet or device and see like, okay, I get a data curve and all that sort. I want them to be here because when I look at peak power too, I'm also looking at a couple other things as well. Cool thing about they also measure eccentric RFD, eccentric velocity. So the eccentric, in my opinion, was heavily skipped out in the training programs that I was able to kind of utilize in the past as well, because you know tempos are great for eccentric, and overloader eccentrics are great too, but weight releases are never going to be fast enough, or what's it called, bands. And the closest thing we could get in the weight room, that in my weight room, would be bands, but we're never going to get to the eccentric velocities to the sport, right? So we want to kind of create that or
Mm.
close that gap. So when I was real time in person, I would say look at one number while I look at 20 different numbers, right? So for some people, I would skew more towards, obviously I would look at their peak power, tell them add weight, whatever it may be. But I'm also looking at their time to peak velocity, because if they're producing that peak power in 800 milliseconds, and then they got their indoor season coming up, that's going to be way too slow, right? So that would be an example. So it's pretty quick, pretty easy, but it would be in real time. If the athlete was in the facility and I wasn't, I would talk to other strength coaches, and I'm just like, okay, kind of here are the little nuances that I'm looking for. And if we got that, if they sent over the data and I kind of highlighted it, I would say this is your working percentage, right? So week 2, you're working 90% of your peak power. Week 3, you're working 110% of your peak power, whatever it may be, all right? Or sometimes I would just say hit 1.15 for your peak velocity. So it would kind of switch from week to week. So I wouldn't use average velocity as much within that phase, but I have used average velocity with eNode as well. But yeah, that's a whole nother discussion in itself. But
Have you
yeah,
tried using flywheel to get more intent through that eccentric phase?
yeah. So we had 2 flywheel devices and we broke both of them. So
Nice.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, our athletes were so damn strong that they snapped it. So I want to get
Was
another
it?
one. Yeah.
Don't mention the company, but does it begin with an E or an F?
It begins with a letter. So yeah, yeah, there we go.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
I'll get it
But
afterwards.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I loved it. So actually, one thing about that too, and we talked about the Kaiser calf a little bit before we kind of started this whole shindig, but I don't have a Kaiser calf. We don't have a Kaiser calf. It's something I want to utilize sometime in the future. But what I would do is I would have, because soleus is something that is highly overlooked within strength training, and I don't think just for like bodybuilding or whatever that sort too, is because everyone is going to progress it through weight, never through velocity. Because the velocities that you experience during ground contact time, so let's say you have, max velocity sprint, are never going to be relative to me going for 3 sets of 8, trying to get that sarcomeric or myofibrillar hypertrophy, right? So I would use flywheel, or I would use flywheels as a way to get another stimulus of overspeed eccentrics. So yeah, or overloaded eccentrics. So that was one thing. That was actually one of the reasons why I bought the eNode too, because the eNode was actually compatible with the flywheel. But
Mm.
the 2 flywheels I had broke before I was able to utilize it. So
What's the reason you run conjugate with your athletes in particular, or why do you think it's the best
mhm.
I guess structure
I
programming?
was
Yeah.
before you answer, I have a question on this, and I kind of want to impose it on you too. I saw this video a couple days ago, and I don't want to say it's a dissing conjugate because I respect the variability of conjugate, and I like the different implementations of equipment. But it was essentially like, why run different um like specialty equipment when people just need to learn the basics first, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So like for my beginner athletes too, like I think something that's been mentioned in the past is like a 1 by 20 system, right? So you're getting kind of the neuromuscular coordination of doing something for 20 repetitions for a set, right? And then, that could be good if you, let's say, if you're trying to learn how to do a clean for the first time, right? I don't really do cleans that much, but you'll see it periodically, very, very infrequently, but you'll see it. But the reason why, I mean, for my lower level athletes too, like they need a general base of strength. So sometimes something simple is just like a 4 by 5, 5 by 5. That'll be something that you see in the program as well. But for my higher end athletes too, especially since they're going through a lot of volume, yeah, I don't have a reason for them to be doing, like, let's say quads or fives or six reps, especially when they're going like for heavier weights, right? Because what I found too is it was always volume that got me messed up and got a couple other people messed up, as I've seen progress throughout the year as well. But if you don't have that work capacity as having an early training age, then you definitely need that. So build up your tissue tolerance, build up your tissue resiliency. So later on, when you're adept to that, then you're able to handle those loads and intensities, right? But for beginner athletes, and I usually don't mention this too for the conjugate or anything of that sort too. I'll do something simple, just like 4 by 5, right? So you're mastering the basics using, as I said, the weight room is a means, not the end, right? But yeah, if they get a general strength stimulus, gross motor patterns, um, because since they're getting neurological stimulus as well, that's gonna help them in the long run for their sport.
I'm actually really interested in the 4, 6, and 8 inches and loading them differently as well. I had Tim Shushumel on, and he talked
Hmm.
about this concept of you essentially can't research all that well into depth drops, because the better an athlete will get it, the higher you have to move the boxes. So
Hmm.
that jump is always taking like less time to activate, because there's that jump in there. So loading it from a light to obviously heavy, how is that sort of changed some of the metrics that you're testing?
So are you talking about for depth jumps or for the step ups?
Both.
Both. Okay. So usually most of the time for depth jumps, we mostly do 12 nowadays. So that's kind of just like a logistical thing. So we usually do 12.
So is that
Um,
12 for all athletes, or will there be some variance in there?
there's some variants, right? But I would say general idea we use 12. We typically find just the correct GCTs are in line with the jump heights that we want as well. But for the step ups, this is where the fun kind of, like, in my opinion, begins. So with the 4, 8, 12, right? So 4 inches, you think that's not a lot in terms of the range of motions that you need to move through, right? So what I say, it's as important for, let's say, a goalie, hockey, right? I'm probably not going to be having them do that, right? So I would probably skew them more towards the 12. But people were actually able to get higher peak velocities with more range of motion just because of the momentum of it, right? So if I'm not looking or something, they throw like 2 plates on there or a 250 or whatever it may be. And they're gonna be like, oh yeah, like look at my peak power, like right, like this is what you wanted, right? I'm getting a lot of watts for this 12-inch step up, and I'm like, okay, like obviously they're strong enough, so I'm like, okay, I'll hold on real quick to try to kind of make them understand what the big picture is. I'm like, okay, do that same thing with the two DC blocks I have. So two DC blocks, they're 4 inches in total. So I had them do a step up on that. They're like, oh, that was easy. I'm like, okay, we'll pull up the metrics. Um, they're, let's say, their time to peak velocities are very quick, very, in fact, quicker than the 12-inch step ups, right? But the power that they have is way too low, right? And still, the time to peak velocities that I want are not the ones that I desire. They're like, oh, I got 200. 200 is not what I'm looking for, right? Because if you're able to, and I'll prove this to any other exercise too, that if I'm ever taking into consideration peak velocity, peak power, or time to peak velocity, that I could get about like 6,000 watts from a back squat that might take 900 milliseconds. If I'm kind of tapering towards the season, where would that be useful? probably more on the force end, right? So if I'm an Olympic weightlifter, that might have much more correspondence compared to if I'm, a 200-meter sprinter, right? Because it's going to be a little too slow. I don't want to be producing 6,000 watts within 900 milliseconds anytime during my sprint. So with the 4.812, we'd be going for peak velocity numbers. And with these peak velocity numbers, and I kind of try to experiment it for all of my athletes too, I found a couple velocities that were able to keep them within the milliseconds that I wanted, right? So I understand that at a higher bot height, they're going to be a little longer on the ground. So they will be longer in order to get their top velocity. While at the shallower heights, it'd be a low PV, so peak velocity, but it'd also be a low TPV. And they're like, why are we doing the exercise if we're not producing enough power? I'm like, you need to know how to produce the power at this range of motion because it's relative to what you do.
Because obviously,
I'm curious as to. Oh, I
go
was
Drew.
gonna ask,
No, it's all good.
like how do you communicate the with your athletes around and to get them to understand what what you guys are trying to accomplish,
Yeah.
especially with like high schoolers and
Yeah.
like middle school.
Luckily, a lot of the, and then most of the time, if I do put them under VBT, right, I know that they're emotionally mature enough to handle it and mentally have the capacity to understand it. They don't need to understand the exact numbers and everything of that sort, but I need them to understand like why this would be beneficial, right? So I'm probably not going to take someone that squats only their body weight under the E note, right? So just because there's so many other steps that we need to hit before we want to go there. I've actually tried to do like almost having the TPV biased a programming for all my athletes too at one point in time. So even the athletes that weren't able to accelerate 2 times body weight as quick as the others, right? And even though it is an elastic response, and I do agree that you should have these elastic responses in the long-term athletic development model, besides peak growth height, just because of injury risk. But what I found is they weren't able to benefit as much from it compared to just general strength training if they weren't able to accelerate their mass quick enough, right? So this programming that I kind of have been talking about was definitely for the athletes that already had a good strength level. Some would disagree that they would be like, oh, they constantly need to know how to accelerate the bar at these milliseconds and everything like that. So I'm like, yeah, I agree. But if you have a closer eye on them, let's say if you have them in 5 days a week, that might be more programmatically appropriate. Whereas if I have someone with like once a week or twice a week, that might not be kind of where the meat and potatoes of the program should be for them, right? So I would say, luckily, I have that problem. So not everyone is using VBT if they work with me. So that's one thing that helps me out. But in terms of communication as well, and I know especially some of the kids that kind of translate over from high school strength conditioning. They get the strength coach, they're doing their 5x5, which is a great program in itself, right? But they might be doing other things as well. And now they're trying to understand like, what do these numbers mean? Like all this sort of like, I don't even know what velocity means. Like, isn't that the same thing as acceleration and speed, all that sort, right? So it's a sit down conversation, right? But at the end of the day, it's the KISS principle. So keep it stupid simple. So how am I going to have them understand what TPV means when in their sport? So a very simple thing is I use the shred mill too. That's something that me and Manny got to talk about last podcast as well. So all my athletes, they'll be on the shred mill and they'll see this acceleration chart, and they'll see that, oh, I got 10 miles per hour in 2.7 seconds, right? So they kind of got a gist of that. They understand what an XY graph looks like. They understand what it is. And then I always reference back to that, and I'm like, okay, do you want to be the fella that or the person or the athlete that wants to get to 10 miles per hour in 3 seconds or 1 second? And obviously, this is a very superficial question and a very arbitrary question that could be taken into different ways in our industry, right? But for the most time, the athletes will be like, oh, like, yeah, I want to be there in 1 second, right? So I'm just like, okay, so that's your ability to accelerate to your velocity in your sport. Like, let's say during basketball, because I knew you're a really good basketball player too. Like, it's almost having that first step explosiveness in order to drive to the basket, right? So that's how it always translated to. Luckily, there's a lot of specific things and analogies that I was able to pick up on that I'm able to translate that over to. But yeah, it's a bit harder to. I would say all the track people understand it for sure. They're just like they pick it up
Mm.
that. Some of them actually prefer just the meathead lifting stuff. They're like, oh, let me throw some chains on here. Let me do my sumo deadlift, right? And then I think that has its time and place for everyone, right? Even the track athletes. But I know sometimes it can be a handful. So that's why I deal with the back end stuff. So yeah.
How important is it for you both to experiment with your programs?
Wait, what was that?
How important is it for you and True to experiment with your programs and sort of add in these new sort of nuanced things to what you're doing?
Yo, Hechu.
I experiment all the time in the sense of with a lot of my clients. I mean, some clients they still play sports, they go skiing, they're still very active, and I might cater some things towards that of like, hey, we just need to get your legs strong because we don't want to get hurt when we're skiing, right? But at the end of the day, their training ages are so low because they're not Division 1 athletes. They weren't Division 1 athletes. They might have. They're coming to see me because they don't know how to train, right? They might have not had a lot of experience in the weight room, or maybe if they did, they've never actually had a coach in the weight room. So this is their first time having a strength coach. And for me, again, you can do anything and it works,
Mm.
really. So it doesn't matter if we are like, for example, generally when I first get introduced to someone, obviously I'm going to assess them, and during that introductory, we do like an intro workout, and so like during that intro workout, I'm going to poke and prod until I find what you're really bad at, and then based on like your movement assessment, what you tell me in terms of what your goals are, then those will inform me to then guide what I'm going to give you during that first workout to see, okay, in order to get to where you want to go, and based on your past history of training, let's see where you're at. Let's find our baseline, and then this also then establishes, okay, what are going to be our KPIs to know we're heading in the right direction. But when your goals are fat loss, build some muscle, be healthier, longevity, and play with your kids, look better naked, it's pretty simple in terms of what you can do so much that'll get you
Mm.
there, right? You can do 1x20, you could do just 3x10, and you can run just 3x6, 3x8, 3x10 linear periodization for an entire year, and they'll fare great with it. And I'll throw in, because obviously, like with the strength coach background, I'm always going to dose in some power, some jumping. I'm going to intro them to some skipping. I'm going to intro them. But when your clients don't know their left hand from their right foot, for me, it's really, really simple.
How hard is
It's
dead
really, really
bugs
simple.
from Gen Pop?
Oh, dude, we'll do all the dead bugs till the cows come home. Like just to teach posture, just to
Mm.
teach what it feels like to brace, just to teach those things. So I'm a lot more in terms of programming. I give a ton of variety, and so long as we cover our big buckets of squat, hinge, push, pull, carry. Are we doing some type of explosive work, just to touch it a little bit? Are we doing some type of conditioning, whether it's with me during our session or whether it's outside, like as homework? And then like what kind of lifestyle modifications? It's a lot more lifestyle coaching
Mm.
than it is really like, again, the programming is rather simple. And if anything, I focus more on looking at, because again, it's just one-on-one. So I can be real individual and I can really change things up on the fly based on what I see in front of me. So recently I took Prescript, the
Mm.
biomechanics course, and I've been applying a lot of that because I'm so hands-on with my clients. And so that's been really fun because I can really get nitty-gritty into cueing, the coaching, the getting people to feel what I'm trying
Mm.
to, or like, okay, this is how you create tension here. This is how this is why we're doing this in this way. So more so, I guess, the biomechanics side, like some people who have imbalances or Like I have some guys who are like have some really bad shoulders, or they bad relative bad shoulders or bad hips. Being able to assess and then pinpoint, okay, what is it that we want to do? Where are you currently at? What are your limit? What about your shoulders? What about your hips? What about your structure right now is limiting your ability to do the things you want to do? And then how are we going to implement and apply the exercises that'll
Mm.
get you to where you want to be, right, and get you better. And but again, a lot of variety, trying to expose them to as many
Stimuli. Yeah.
movements as possible throughout the range of programming. Because for me also, like my goal is within a year of working with me, will you be capable of walking into a gym on your own
Mm.
and knowing what to do? Because then I would have known that I've set my client up for life and not just for them to have to rely on me when they want to work out. Because ultimately, like I care more so
Mm.
about the rest of
Long-term
their
care, yeah.
life than you getting a six pack in 6 months.
Nate?
Yeah.
Yeah, so with experimenting, I think every good strength coach also has to be a scientist in itself. And if you're in sports science, right, any good sports scientist should also be, to an extent, a strength coach, right? So I think it's a duality that has to happen when it comes to progressing not just your knowledge but your career, if that's what you're motivated by. Usually, I just love to see what works and what doesn't uh, for my athletes, right? Because athletes, when you're looking at someone, it's not just the data and the numbers that speak, but it's literally the things that you see while they sprint during acceleration, the way their foot lands, everything that sort of their arm action, right? That's just one example. But now that you're kind of seeing this bio social economical model of this person, not right, not just this athlete, and you're hearing how they're getting 3 hours of sleep. You kind of hear about their nutrition and it's crap. Like now, what do we do that because I can't just rely on chat gpt or ai just to give me a formula anymore, right? So what do I do with all this knowledge that I've experimented with and try to figure out this person's solutions, right? So I think it's very important. um, and I would say the important experimenting too is, like, let's say, I think a huge missing part in programming for strength conditioning would be the dynamic isometric strength phase. Because if we're talking about, and the theory is like the latter parts of the eccentric phase, there isn't a continuation of lengthening, right, of the fibers, but it's an isometric. So, and then this is from Professor John Crone from New Zealand, and he's kind of proven that's the case. And this is still in development, right? But if we look at Titan, it acts as a bungee cord while myosin act and lock together. And this is the filament binding theory. And in the latter parts of the eccentric phase, that is what's happening. The only way to get this to happen is through velocity. So I can move it slow. I'm probably not getting that effect to that extent, but through velocity, that's what is enacted. But you got to move 80% of velocity that you're capable of eccentrically. That's why people use overspeed eccentrics. That's why people use Kaiser. And that's why we talked about it a little bit before we went live, right? But with Titan, that's kind of what's happening with actin myosin. It slides it back and forth and they bridges and it creates friction, which makes things happen. So in the latter parts of the eccentric phase, they lock onto each other and become isometric. So with eccentric training, like getting strong in the eccentric, it gets people ridiculously strong, gets people to produce ridiculous amounts of force, right? But nothing really happens to power without the introduction of velocity. So especially from that DIS phase. So in that latter phase of, I mean, we all got to use the Kaiser equipment when we got onto the Olympic side of things as well. So I think we're all kind of on the same page with that. But that's kind of been the foundation of where my mind's been churning this past year, right? Because even going back to the ground contact time things, even going back to GCT milliseconds, like if I have a high jumper and they're usually on the ground for like 200, 250 milliseconds, like do I need them to do a full back squat, while in their off season, maybe for a GP period, all that sort of, maybe if they're coming back from injury. But if we're looking at 450 to 700 milliseconds during a back squat, it's going to be, there's that gap as I talked about before. But as I said, the importance between kind of experimenting with athletes, understanding the data that goes behind them too, I think that's with utmost importance. Um, because especially if you're trying to get them to their goals, you got to be on top of your game,
Mm.
continuing your education, always learning, reading new things, whether if it's transfer of training, well, by Anatoly Bondarchuk. The reason why I say that because it's right here. I'm reading right now. Super old book, but yeah. So I'm reading that. You always got to continue on your education, right? So whether if it's like listening to some new Altus courses, listening to how Xavier Worthy got to his record, whether if it's listening to like Thoreau's coach, anything of that sort, you always need to be listening and understanding the educational side of things and being able to not just implement that. And a lot of people, the reason why they're unmotivated to listen to these things as well is because they're probably not going to use it, right? So it's like an iceberg effect. You use the 10% and you got the 90% under the water, right? But anytime you got to use that 90%, then you know it's at your disposal as well. Um, and
Yeah.
if you're only motivated by results and not the journey in itself, um, you may have to look for a different career as well.
We've spoke about AI a couple of times now, so I feel like obliged to bring this up. Um, I've got very strict thoughts on it. I think you can use AI to build programs in this industry, whether it's PTing or being a strength coach for athletes. And I had a conversation on someone that is doing research in this field. So he's essentially building this ideal model to program for athletes, but even he's having a hard time because the term fatigue isn't um, exactly specified. Like no one knows what fatigue actually is. It just is a thing, but we don't know how to get there effectively. So even when we come up to AI, it's like you can put the same a description for someone and it could spit out a program, but if you line up 10 people with that same description, that program won't work for someone, for like a lot of those people. So, like, how are you used to seeing like this high involvement in S&C or coaching? And what's your thoughts on how effective it actually is?
Man, not gonna lie. So with AI, I'm not the most or equipped technologically, right? I don't really understand these things, and I'm not really up to date on social media or anything as well like that. So you mentioned that was kind of new to me as well. I haven't utilized AI besides through emailing people,
Mm,
so I would say that's the extent of it. I know in certain applications for strength conditioning, I have seen
yeah, that's
AI.
where I'm coming from as well.
Yeah, I know I've seen that. Let's say if it's like estimating numbers or all that sort. That's what I've just ran into personally. I have heard about the programming stuff, but yeah. So that's the extent of my knowledge. But I don't think it's applicable for everyone, as you said.
I feel like the I've used AI for making learning easier in the sense
Mm,
of I just upload a PDF, read this book, give me the main points, highlight these points. Okay, expand more on this. Okay, now I want you to explain this in these terms. Okay, now I want you to dial it down. Okay, now I want you to create a blueprint and a guideline for this, like for
mm,
clients for this. So it expedites learning. It expedites the back end side of things, but it will never replace actual coaching because, and as we know, anyone can write a great program. It's the old adage of anyone can write a great program, but if it ain't coached well,
mm-hmm.
it don't matter. If the athlete's not doing it right, it don't matter. And ultimately, AI is not going to be able to give you buy. It's not going to get your clients to buy in to do a program, dude. Anyone can go on ChatGPT and ask for, hey, give me a great total body workout program that'll get me snatched in 6 weeks. But are you going to do it? Probably not. Are you going to, how do you know you're doing your squat right? How does AI know you're doing your squat right?
Mm,
How does the AI know where you're feeling tension? Things like that. I don't think so. It's impossible to replace that. The hands-on and also dynamic nature
mm.
of being there with your athlete
Have
and
you
coaching them through.
have you seen it more happening in the PT side where there's a lot more or a lot less restrictions on the quality?
Dude, there are there are so many fucking fitness influencers that look great that
That's
sell
why I'm
programs
asking it. Let's
online.
go.
But like I said, there a shit program done well is still going to deliver better results than a good program not done well or not coached well. Be, just because, like, again, if a person is not going to do your program, it don't matter what it looks like, right? So I think and people, you can buy any program there is out there. You can go to any fitness influencer. You can buy their program. You don't have to go to one specific person. People fall in love with more so their
Mm.
personality, like what Nate mentioned earlier, the emotional attachment, the logical attachment to a person. Um, and that goes into the marketing side of things and the more business side of things. But it's, again, the principles, like Coach Mack used to say, he's not philosophy based; he's principle
Mhm.
based. So the principles are never going to change. There are only a couple of principles. You can really apply whatever means you need to get your clients, get your athletes to where they want to go, get them
I've
to their goals.
I've
But
been watching a lot of Will Tenson recently. Like
yeah, Will
he's
Tennyson, yeah,
yeah, he's funny.
I
A
love
couple of
that
weeks
guy.
ago, he had a video up of he bought social media influencers programs and
Yeah,
tested them and rated them. Like some of the stuff that they're programming is fucking wild.
it's insane. Yeah, that's why I say ChatGPT can probably write a better program, but people aren't going to buy ChatGPT's program. They're going to buy this person's program because of marketing, social media, and those things. And even at that, at the end of the day, these people are probably better off doing this person's program than just not doing anything at all. So it's like any action is better than inaction.
Mm.
We're very jaded because we're in within the industry and we know a lot better and we know we can decipher what's good and bad. But normal people don't know that. At one point, we didn't know that, and so I think we have to also empathize
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think it's
with
because we
that.
are jaded that we kind of look at
Yeah,
these things and we're like, how can people be so stupid
yeah. But hey,
into buying it?
listen, that fitness influencer making
Bank.
5x are all our incomes combined, right? And we think it's unfair, but we can't just so what? We just gotta sit on our couch and be like, no, I'm gonna like these. I'm just gonna shake my hand in the air and be
Mm.
so mad and angry and not do anything about it. No, we have to keep putting ourselves out there and keep. Otherwise our voices just get drowned.
I
And
found
so, but
sorry, I found my old YouTube channel where I had like fitness videos. Bro,
yeah.
I'm mortified. I was thinking about re-uploading them onto a new one to be like, this is the stupid shit I used to get up to.
as you should be, because if you didn't look back and think about, wow, well, what the fuck was I doing, then
Mm.
you didn't learn anything new, you didn't grow, you didn't gain any more wisdom, you
This is
just
something
be in
that
the same
me
place.
and Adam Fight spoke about on our episode as well. I know he's one of your biggest mentors, and it's like there's a big learning curve, and the way he runs a program at Springfield is insane because he will look at what students are there and how to sort of apply certain methods to one another.
Yeah, no, 100%. Again, that's another thing, right? There are a countless amount of programs that are out there, but why is it that why are we doing this program to begin with? What is the point? Why does this make the most sense for me? And that's where I I don't think AI can take into account
Mm.
all of those factors. Um, the Like Nate was talking about, the biopsychosocial, the things outside of just. Um, I mean, I don't know. I could be saying this, but in 20 years, AI comes so far that I don't need to ever even think about programming ever again. We just upload super training. We upload triphasic. We upload everything onto ChatGPT. It reads it and it
Mm.
spews out a fantastic annual cycle.
Well, what the researcher was saying is that he's essentially trying to. So the way he's doing it, he's obviously doing it as part of himself and his training. So he's teaching AI everything about him to spit up a program that's applicable to him and his specific needs. But then again, like with that, it's probably more time consuming to do that than to just write a program for yourself.
Well, right now, because that we don't have that AI yet,
Yeah,
and so he has to develop it, and so it's taking a lot more time to teach AI what a strength
yeah.
coach, the thought process and the mindset of a strength coach, and also at that, there's no another issue is that there is no definite. This is going to lead to progress.
Hmm.
Like I said, right? There are so many ways in which you can do something because the underlying principles don't change. So long as you're training with enough intensity, enough volume, you have enough recovery in between. You eat like a real man. You'll probably make great gains,
She's getting
right?
cancelled. Was a man.
Oh, what I mean is just don't eat like an idiot. All right. So,
I got Nate to
but
smile.
I'm
but
not saying anything.
at the at the end of the day, at the end of the day, if you do the basics and you do them extremely well, um, like I was at a conference and Bruce Schexnayder, he's he's a track and field coach at LSU,
Hmm.
and he was talking about his process with his athletes. Stupid simple, stupid simple. They lift heavy, they run fast, and they recover. And those are like the three big keys. And yes, he does. There is some more complexity to it, but in when it is applied, it like you cover your bases, and you'll probably make great gains. And we all know this as coaches, but like in the back of our minds, we can only reference the anecdotal experience and also what other coaches have found successful to then help drive our athletes forward. The best when you're writing your program, you understand in the back of your mind that this I don't know if this is the best program for my athlete, and that's just us being like real. Like I don't know if this is exactly what my athlete needs. This is what I think my athlete needs. This is what I think my athlete needs because we all will tend to have biases, and I know this is getting kind of meta. Um, the way in which Mike Boyle would approach or would program for the same athlete will be very different than Will Rattel will be very different from Austin Yoakum will be very different from Eric Cressy will be very different from Coach Mack, and yet on their program that athlete the five versions of that athlete might still get a lot better, and but better is also subjective too,
Mhm.
and we can put objective measures around it, KPIs. Are you better at your sport? Your output at your sport, and those things. But at the end of the day, like to kind of put a bow tie on it, it was still so early on, and there are still there's so many different styles
Mm.
of programming, right? What worked with Verkoshansky is also very different from the way in which Cal Dietz does things, right? And who's to say like don't both both don't work? It's just
Mhm.
okay based on our constraints, based on the athlete in front of us. How can we apply the principles to to get them better?
That's another point as well. It's no matter how good your program is and how good your athlete is doing in your program, they could still end up not being the best of athletes, or vice versa. They could not care about your program. They do it because they have to, but they could just be like beasts.
Is this program going to make you LeBron James? No, right? I can't promise you that. I can do my best in making the right, I guess, programming decisions, and well, I can do my best in trying to get you to your fullest potential. But I don't even know what your fullest potential is,
Hmm.
right? It's impossible for me to know. I don't have a crystal ball as a strength coach either. So really, it's really hard to definitively say like this is what's best practice. Obviously, we know it's better, but what is best, that is really hard to say.
Mm.
So it's pretty convoluted. I feel like you can get pretty convoluted.
Yeah, and I think just gonna kind of popping up onto your point as well. Like a lot of athletes, are they athletic because of their training, or even people as well, right? Or are they athletic, or are they able to do the things they could do despite their training? right?
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we'll see all the time too. Like you'll see training that might not be applicable from one person to the other, and then it might work for one person, might not work for the other, or it might work for someone, but could it be better? Yeah, so that's why as coaches and educators, we need to be on top of what we know and what to do, and then like for PTs, for physical therapists, I should say, right,
Mm.
or a physiotherapist, whatever the
Yeah,
case
I
may be.
always say that. Because in the UK, PT is personal trainers and not
Yeah,
physiotherapy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just had to bring that up real quick. It's like on our side of the industry, right? I'm not saying we need to know like people's blood types. I know we don't need to know every single thing medically what's going on, right? But at the end of the day, like sometimes our clients or athletes are with us more than they'll ever see a doctor in their life,
Mhm.
right? Or a physical therapist, physiotherapist in their life. So as educators and people with this education, we need to know. I'm not going to say everything under the sun, but we need to know what not to do in order to cause further harm as well. And harm is a pretty arbitrary word in our industry, right? So if you're working with a 50-year-old Sally that's trying to go skiing this weekend, I might not want to put her under, a 500-pound barbell. That's just being hyperbolic, right? Or harm for someone else in another situation is saying putting them into a non-advantageous position during a hinge maneuver due to previous lower back injuries, knowing that they have a competition coming up for track and field. So that's another way of harming. Then there's also psychological harm, um, emotional harm, all that sort as well. So I think harm is a pretty arbitrary statement, but we need to know in the industry as well. I'm not saying we need to have a key for every single problem in the world, but we need to know not what to do in order to cause further deficiencies within the human body or to humans in itself. So, I
Mm.
mean, I know Manny. There's a little snippet of the podcast that I saw that a gentleman was mentioning like voodoo flossing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Caning.
that's something that I
Yeah.
implement as well, right? I'm not saying I know everything that a physio knows. Obviously, it's two different careers or something that a physical therapist should know. But what could I do with my athlete now to help them feel better? What could I do to kind of work around this injury? What could I do to increase recoverability or to increase the parasympathetic response in their nervous system after the workout? Right. So I think there's just these things that we need to pick up on um, because the industry in itself has, I mean, as she was talking about, there's influencers out there, that look amazing. They're charismatic, they're handsome, they're beautiful, whatever it may be, and they know how to talk the talk. At least what sounds good for people, right? So the floor is a lot lower than what it was initially back then, right? So almost like anyone could hop in. Like crap, if I had a 405 bench press and I showed it on social media and I put a great font and everything of that sort. I'm like, hey, you want a bench like me? Buy this. It's the only way to do it. And that's a possibility, right? I might not have the education, but I did what worked for me, and that's why everyone should do it, right? That's not what's gonna work for Manny, right? That's not what's gonna work for Chu. It's not gonna work for everyone else under the sun, too, right? So. Just because you know what works for one person doesn't mean you know what works for everyone else too. So I think the floor for our industry has definitely kind of fallen over the years. And I think that's why it's up for people that have the education level too, in order to educate others, help others.
Mm.
Um, for, so at the end of the day, we could kind of, I'm not going to say floss out those people, but we got to make sure, people kind of know the truth as well and everything
I
that
think
sort.
I think
Yeah.
that's the issue though, because like True mentioned before, we are kind of jaded to these, and like we have a
Yeah.
higher understanding of programming and principles and whatnot.
Hmm.
We sometimes get scared, and this is something that we spoke about on our latest episode too, is we're so scared to we're so scared to have it wrong that we end up not doing anything about it. So I kind of
Hmm.
feel like there is a lot of great coaches in this industry, but most of the ones that we respect the most, they're not making content. They're
Yeah.
coaching. and it's kind of that thing where as novices, i.e. influencers, they're happy to just post anything because they found this thing that works. Whereas we kind of look at content and we're like, oh fuck, actually I don't want to post this because I know that this method contradicts everything that I'm saying. So what if someone comes at me for that?
But here's another thing too: is that in 5 to 10 years, what we do now and what we believe now is going to be outdated anyways.
Mm,
So if just as you made those YouTube videos of what you were doing before, and just as in 5 to 10 years you're gonna look back at your programs that you're writing right now, based on what you know, you're gonna look at it and you're gonna be like, why the fuck was I doing that? Why was I doing 500 pound single leg accentuated eccentric squats with Sally? Like what, you're going to look back at your programs and you're going to think that this is dated anyway. So you're never ever going to know enough. Like to Nate's point, we're going to try and learn as much as we can. We're going to apply as much as we need, and then from there, understand that
mm,
you're always going to be a white belt. Understand there's always going to be more. There's always going to be stuff that you also won't know. There's things out there that you don't even know that you don't know.
yeah.
So there's always going to be that ambiguity, and you just have to rock with the things that you do. So making the most of what you do have, and making the most of what's in front of you,
Mm.
and then from there, like fucking just bite the ego, throw it in the trash, and post and put more stuff out.
I've been going through flexible nonlinear periodization just now. It takes a lot. It takes a bit longer to program on the back end, but it kind of does mitigate some of the intricacies from day to day with athletes and clients.
We do have to hit
Yeah,
another
I
episode.
mean, I want to keep this as um a little series, the Dub-Ois. I always love chopping it up with you guys.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
But just before we bounce off, if you just let everyone know where they can find you and sort of follow you and ask questions.
yeah. I'm on Instagram at justbchu, JUSTBCHU. It's
I
pretty
love
simple.
that middle post right there.
But yeah, at Just Be Chew, I kind of create content. I just fuck around with it. And then that's probably the easiest way to reach me. I'm not really on anything else.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, for me, well, I just gotta say, like, I don't think we've all been in the same conversation in almost what 3 years,
3 years.
guys.
Yeah,
Years. So I'm first of all, because I know I've gotten to talk to you, Manny, individually, like a year and a half ago, and then Chu, obviously, over the summer and everything of that sort. So it's just nice being able to talk it up with you fellas. As always, it's like the good old days. We just need to get some food at Don James and all that.
Yeah,
But
get some
going
fun.
back to yeah, exactly. And chalk it up then. But you could find me. I usually just use Instagram. I don't post typically as much. Like, yeah, as you can see, it's just my personal life. It's nothing exercise science, physiology based. It's nothing of that sort. I think I used to do more of that stuff just over this past year. And I was talking to Manny and Chu about it. I haven't been on social media uh, promoting that or anything of that sort. Typically, it's very wordy, very long, very boring to read if I do make Instagram post about um, these things. But so if that's your thing, sure. I can't promise you'll see it frequently anymore. But who knows? Maybe I'll find some type of social media platform to do that if it seems just or anything of that sort.
I
But
find that helpful. Post more, fucker.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
all
All
I
right.
will retweet what B just said.
Okay, awesome. Maybe I might make a different Instagram then or something of that sort. So, but as of now, yeah, Manny showed that Instagram. So Nathan underscore Alice at Instagram. No Twitter. TikTok is only for memes. So yeah, so you won't find nothing there. Snapchat is only for the boys. So, but yeah, so those are the kind of the best ways to contact me. Instagram. But yeah,
Perfect. Let's get another one in the books. I appreciate you
yeah,
both for coming on.
of course, of course.
Much love, y'all. Can't wait to
Peace.
link up in person at one point.